And the doctor is a typical Pan-Africanist. This goes by the name Kwame. Should I say more about you?
Oh, sure. At least until.
Whilst you are preparing. And this morning, Raisa and I saw him eating. At the point, I'm like, what is this guy doing? He used a natural spoon, you know, spoon, a spoon. So with oats, he was scooping. One gentleman passed by, like, what do you mean? There are spoons here. But he believes that if it was a wooden spoon or a ladder, he would have used it. That he would not use a spoon as someone's culture when he has his own culture. And that's why he has this dress and everything. And I think after some time, he's gradually converting me into one of his disciples. Except that I wouldn't have the hair because my hair is already gone. But I think there are things I would love to do with him. And I told him that, look, as a TV presenter, there was a day I went to visit a friend, and then my friend's kids were like, hey, today the man is a gentleman. I'm like, what do you mean? So every day he doesn't dress, just because on my show I wear the African cloth. So I'm not dressing up. So when you wear a suit, then you're a gentleman. And I'm sure he's correcting some of them. Probably by the time you go to, you make disciples of some of us. Okay, Doc, the audience.
I know be gentleman at all. Okay, my name is Dr. Obanile Kambon, Research Fellow at the Institute of African Studies. Very quickly, do you want the presentation in English, in Twi, or in Yoruba? I've given you 3 options. But actually, anytime, any place I want to learn some of the language, so can anyone tell me how to say health in Dagbani? Alafi. Oh, it's very much like the Arabic one. Okay, Alafi. And what about communication? How can we say communication in Dagbani? Anyone? Yechwa. So, Alafi is health, Yechwa, communication. Alright, so when I give presentations, I like to use call and response. So when I say Alafi, I want you to say Yechwa. Can we do that? Alafi. Yechwa. Alafi. Yechwa. Alafi. Yechwa. Okay, wonderful. Alright, since no one gave me any of the 3 options that I offered, do we go for English, do we go for Twi, do we go for Yoruba? Okay, so we're working on resources for health communication. This is Unit 4. I'm told that the lunch is now ready, so I will at least introduce the subject, and then when they give us the cue, then we will go. Because I see some of you are starting to rub your bellies and you're wondering what's going on, but we are very cognizant of your own Alafi. What's the response, huh? Anytime I say it, this is how I make sure that you're paying attention. Right? Alafi. 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 Okay, wonderful. Now, since we are dealing with health communication, I wanted to give some background to let you know that I'm coming from Institute of African Studies. This is the world's oldest medical institution, and it was founded right here in Africa. Now, how many people have learned about the world's oldest medical institution in the world was right here in Africa? Anyone? Are there any nurses, midwives, health practitioners here? Anyone? Okay, we have 1, 2. Okay, so there's 2. Well, this is very important information. Now, medical institutions were referred to as houses of life, and this is how you write it. The per is house, and then the ankh is life, right? So you write it together. And these were known to have been established in ancient Egypt, or Kemet, which translates to land of black people, as early as the 1st dynasty. So we're talking about 5,000 plus years ago, right? Now, the very first physician is credited as Hesi Ra, chief of dentists and physicians for King Joseph in the 27th century BCE. The earliest known woman physician was known as Mary Pratap. This is her, right? And she looks just like some of the ladies who are sitting right here in the room, right? Now, how many people think, especially ladies, think that if you knew that the world's first female physician was an African who looked exactly like you, how many think that you perhaps would have done even better? I know you've done well. How many think you would have done even better? Right? And I don't have to tell you that she looks like you. All I have to do is show you her picture, right? And she has the head wrap, as I see right here. All right, so that's Mary Ptah, who held the title of chief physician circa 2700 BCE. Also, the second earliest known woman physician, Pestet, this is her here. You see she has locks just like me. Now, when you go all throughout the continent for the past 10,000 years, anytime you see someone with locks, you know that they are a traditionalist, right? That they deal with healing, they deal with divination, all of these things, right? And that's also, this morning when they asked for a prayer, they said either Christian or Muslim. I felt left out because I would have rather gone in for the libation, because for some of us, it still means the exact same thing, right? 10,000 years have been wiped away as soon as Bob Marley came. Now we forgot everything that exists. And as I walk outside, they say Rastaman, right? But again, this is the documentation. This is how you know that they are healing practitioners. Now, if you go to South Africa, you'll see the same thing amongst the Sangoma. If you go to Senegal, you'll see the same thing amongst the Baifal. If you are right here, you'll see the same thing amongst the Akomfo. If you go to Yoruba land, you'll see the same thing amongst Dada. All throughout the entire continent for the past multi-thousands of years. Same thing, but we forget it. But we'll continue. So this is Pesachet here. The 4th dynasty, her title was Lady Overseer of the Lady Physicians. In addition to her supervisory role, she trained midwives at an ancient Egyptian medical school in Say, right? So here we are dealing with midwifery, nursing and midwifery, and this is our precedent. It started right here in Africa, and they looked exactly like you. Now this is what we should get from the very first day that we enter medical school or training, college or anything else. But if we didn't get it, we're getting it now. Alafi. 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 This here is the Kahum Gynecological Papyrus. This is the earliest known medical text of any kind whatsoever. And it dealt with gynecology. So dated to 1800 BCE. There are actually texts that are older, but this is the oldest surviving one. There are some that date back to 3000 BCE, again 5,000 plus years ago. So it deals with women's health, gynecological diseases, fertility, pregnancy, contraception, etc. So as we're dealing with language, can anyone read this for me? Now, if we were about empowering us as African people, this would be the language that we would learn. Now we have classics departments, but in my opinion, they should be called recent department because they start with Greece. At the time that this was going on, there was no such thing as a Greece anywhere in the world. And once Greece came, they came to Kemet, land of black people, to study. Ask Plato, ask Aristotle. They all said, our Greek education is education for guzzling swine. If you read Laws by Plato, he said if you want real education, you have to go to Kemet, land of black people, to get it, right? So these are things that we should know. And again, this is part of the language. Once you know the language, then you can access these documents. So I'm proud to say at the University of Ghana, we started a study group for Medu Necha. It translates to divine writings. That's the oldest writing system in the history of the entire planet Earth, developed where? By the oldest people on the planet Earth. So they would have you think that we were sitting around twiddling our thumbs, waiting for Columbus to discover us, or the Zambuja or whoever. However, we were doing this, and we have the documents. Or rather, Europeans who came and took these documents to Paris, to London, to Berlin, to Turin, to Moscow, they have the documents. So as they were coming to colonize you, they knew about all this. And it makes you wonder, how come they didn't tell you about it? You understand? When you answer that question, that is when we will start thinking in other ways. All right? So we continue. And I come here to this jet black African, Imhotep. I hope we all know his name. This is the world's first multi-genius, right? And this is me here in Kemet, land of black people, touching him as he's overseeing the world's first immaculate conception. This is Set giving birth to Horus, right? All other stories of immaculate conception came from this one, which is carved in stone and predates all other stories of immaculate conception, right? So these are things that we should know. And as you see here, he has forceps, he has scalpels. All of these medical instruments that we know today are carved in stone, right? 3,000 plus years ago. And that's Imhotep I'm touching. Right, so again, this is what they call the Edwin Smith Papyrus because they name things after the people who come to steal them from us. Right? It was written by Imhotep and it has medical information dating to as early as 3000 BC. So Imhotep, the third dynasty, this is the one who built the world's first step pyramid, the oldest stone structure, megalithic structure in the history of the entire planet. But oftentimes we don't hear these people's names. Now that's a very important person. I think just objectively speaking, we can say the author of the world's oldest medical papyrus, the one who is the world's oldest architect. He also dealt with mathematical treatises. I think objectively speaking, we can say that is a very important person, right? Alafi. 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 Very good. So it would make you wonder, well, how come they didn't show you images of this jet black African here? Before we even go into why didn't they teach you the language so that you can access this information? Because perhaps some of this information could help us. Now, it is regarded as an ancient textbook on surgery, almost completely devoid of magical thinking, and describes in exquisite detail the examination, diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis of numerous ailments, right? And is a copy, this particular copy was written in 1600 BC, but this was a copy of a copy of a copy, and it goes so much back further than that. Right? So, Alafi. Alafi. Hope we're starting to, get some of this that we didn't get before. And I really encourage you, if you haven't heard any of this before, to search it for yourself, to start learning to read for yourself. Because it's one thing for me to tell you, it's another for you to educate yourself about it. And then you can see, you know what? This actually is a very valuable document. It gives, ideas of how to treat. It gives ideas of scientific evidence. All of these things that we're taught came to us from those who we can call them our colonial enemies, right? But all of these things predated their existence. And again, these are writing systems that we developed. And if you go to the UK right now, we're still waiting for them to develop their first writing system. Because what they have is a Latin script, which is derived from the Greek script, which is derived from, guess what? Medu Neter. The sacred writings is what the name of the language, the written language was called. This particular one is in hieratic. Now we mentioned briefly the indigenous ideas and thoughts. This is one of the most powerful books I've ever read, and I would encourage anyone who has the ability or wherewithal to get a copy. It's called Self-Healing Power and Therapy, Old Teachings from Africa by Kimbwandende Kiabunseki Fukiao. This was my teacher of Kikongo, the language of Congo. Now, in it, he discusses so many profound concepts about therapeutic communication in traditional Africa. So we've gone to classical Africa, we've come all the way up to traditional Africa. And what made me, I added this slide as I was listening to Prof. Omoniyi speak, because what he was saying reminded me of this text in which it says, running is healing, sitting is healing, whoever alone or together runs or sits heals. Listen to this, right? Alafi. Very good. Touching is healing. Smiling is healing. Whoever alone or together touches or smiles heals. Alafi. Laughing is healing. Crying is healing. Whoever alone or together laughs or cries heals. Alafi. Singing is healing. Dancing is healing. Whoever alone or together sings or dances heals. Alafi. Drumming is healing. Clapping is healing. Whoever alone or together drums or claps heals. Alafi. Coming is healing. Leaving is healing. Whoever alone or together comes or leaves heals. Alafi. Then he asks the question, what else heals? Now, this is, as Prof. Omoniyi was talking about, just feeling, this hand on his shoulder or on his back. That was healing for him, right? Earlier today he was saying, oh, I'm having some pains. Him speaking about it, perhaps that has some type of healing effect. In the thought of the Bakongo, they would say that in and of itself can have healing properties. And this is what they talk about when we say self-healing power and therapy. in Kikongo that's called Lendo. Say it with me, Lendo.
Lelo.
Mu.
Mu.
Kukinyakisa.
Kukinyakisa.
Lendo.
Lendo.
Mu.
Mu.
Kukinyakisa.
Kukinyakisa.
That is power inside of the mu is the same mu that we have here in G and other languages. It's inside of Kukinyakisa. That is self-healing, right? Allah.
Yetwa.
So he goes on to say the African therapist believes that therapy is essentially grounded in both flesh and spirit. Healing wounds of the flesh is only half healing. Furthermore, healing spiritual wounds, restoring individual smile and laughter, social ties and trust in the individual's self-confidence, and the normal flow of one's energy is whole healing. It is regenerating power. Dikitisa Ngolo, the process of restoring partially or totally individual self-healing power. That was called Lendo.
Mu.
Say it with me. Lendo.
Lendo.
Mu.
Mu.
Kukinyakisa.
Kukinyakisa.
Very good. It is allowing the body not only to listen to the harmonious songs of the universe, but to join the singers of that cosmic music of light and balance. Now, as I was reading this book, I was going through a very interesting stage of my life, and the concepts in it were so profound, especially where he's using the Kikongo, where I felt as I was reading the book like I was in a womb about to be reborn, right? Because, you know, to come across such deep understandings and philosophy, right? Right now we're going all the way to places, UK, so forth and so on, for them to teach us about therapeutic communication. But when we talk about resources, and this is what we're talking about, healing communication resources, that sometimes we have a paradigm of forward and backwards. Forward is saying, I'm going to UK and US. Backwards is saying, I'm going back to my village. And that is all we see. It's like a horse with blinders on that looks here, and then looks between its legs, and looks here, and that's all it sees. But for me, coming from African studies, I also want to talk about the value of sometimes looking laterally. So this is coming from the Congo, but we can find that some of these concepts resonate with us. So if we can go all the way to UK and find definitions, or US, and find definitions of therapeutic communication and say, let's apply that here in Ghana, how much more if we just look right next door, Benin? How did traditional spiritual healers and practitioners deal with therapeutic communication? So when you go and see them, they would say, Alafi, Alafi, Alafi. So when you go and see them, they would ask, if you're a woman, oh, what's going on with your husband? Because she understands that the problem with you is bigger than just, oh, you know, I have this heart palpitation or whatever. Well, perhaps things aren't going well in your relationship. And if we can deal with the source, the origin, then we can come here, as opposed to here, even when modern day, even when we're using traditional medicine, it's from, all right, let's just treat the symptom. We don't ask what's going on in your family life, right? But we'll come back to that. Alafi.
Yes,
Alafi.
Yes,
Look at this. This is healing. So, my senior colleague, Prof. Saab, went into the various languages. Now, if we go to language families, we find that we have far less. And if we wanted to deal specifically with mutual intelligibility, we can look by and large of major groups such as Akan, Mole Dagbani, Gadangbe, Ewe, Guan, Belts. Now there are some overlaps and interplays in here, but we can come from these, you know, huge numerical numbers down to, you know, who can understand each other, right? Now oftentimes those who emphasize or overemphasize our divisions are doing that for particular reasons. You know, we can also look at the similarities, even amongst these different groups, because what archaeology, what anthropology, what all these studies tell us is that all humanity existed in Africa first. So to some degree, we have to go all the way up this linguistic tree to, at one point in time, we were all one. Now we're coming back together here in Kanjila, right? Now we deal with these linguistic trees. Alafi. 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 This is communication, because when I see people start to doze off, then I say Alafi, and your neighbor wakes you up. Oh. All right. So as we're dealing with these types of concepts, you know, in linguistics we deal with language trees, right? Now these are language trees like family trees where it comes down and branches off. comes down, branches off. Now, I was at the Legon Botanical Gardens, and I took a picture with my phone of how trees actually grow, especially when they grow together. Now, when this tree and this tree are side by side, you'll notice that the bark starts to come together, and the trees start to merge into one tree, right? And I saw this, and I took a picture where you saw a branch going through the edge of another tree because they were so close. Now, you can see both of them were of the same type of tree, but you can see that when languages come together, they start to merge, right? So even here, when you see that these are separate languages, you will find some Akan influence in Ga. You will find, especially in Accra, some Ga influence in the Akan that's spoken there. You will see some, Guan and Akan influence there. You will see Akan and Ewe influence here, and so forth and so on. This is what happens when, we talk about language trees and it's a metaphor, but sometimes we get so caught up in the metaphor, we stop thinking about the original thing. What happens to real trees? Not the stick figures that we're drawing on paper, right? Alafi. 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 All right? So all of that was just an introduction. Now we'll deal with the actual subject. So these are health and communication resources. Now there are many of these resources that are available to nurses and midwives, and we see that some of these resources go back for thousands and thousands of years. And the language is the key aspect of accessing some of that knowledge. Because as we see, we can't depend on our colonial enemies to give us that knowledge, even when they've taken it and hidden it in museums elsewhere. If we're depending on them, we'll be waiting quite a long time, right? But here, we have plenty of resources, and we'll bring it all the way up to date to some of the digital things, even though that can be traced back to Africa as well, with IFA. So when it comes to healthcare, knowledge can be the difference between health and sickness, or even life and death. But how can knowledge be disseminated in a multilingual environment such as is the norm in Ghana and many other African countries? So this comes down to, do we have a language problem or do we have language solutions, right? Sometimes the various languages that we have are in and of themselves repositories of knowledge, of various herbs, of therapeutic communications. How did we interact with each other, prior to this great disjuncture? So a variety of materials and media become important in bridging the gap between nurses and midwives and the members of the public to be served. Materials can range from multilingual billboards to visually descriptive posters that can be readily understood by all, right? Now in the language that I was speaking about before, Medu-Neter, you'll notice that it has pictographic symbols. So in and of itself is like a billboard that's descriptive, because even if you can't read it, once you understand what these are images of, you can get a concept and idea of what's being spoken about, right? So in this section, we would like to introduce stages in the process of developing resources for health practice. Alafi. Alafi. Paying attention. We will briefly introduce a sample of resources including internet, digital resources, publicity materials, billboards, leaflets, television, radio programs in particular languages, smartphone apps, books, scholarly articles, dictionaries, meta-language texts, blogs, and so on. And here you see this banner here, it says Akwaba, you see Health Keeper. Now, here you have an image of a face and holding what looks to be either the heads of babies or perhaps some type of bamboo. All right? But just to see this, you would say, okay, I see her, she's being tender, she's holding on to something. So these are things, and what I want us to focus on is sometimes we can't find our resources that fit for our particular locale ready-made. So what I want to focus on is empowering each and every one of us to go through stages of how to develop your own resources that fit for your particular context. I think that would be best rather than pointing you to things, from abroad or, elsewhere, right? So here we'll discuss stages for effective resource development, how to create your own tailor-made solutions, also to understand various tools and resources available for ensuring effective therapeutic communication. Now I had a national service person, and she said, yes, I'm excellent at Chi. And I said, oh, wonderful. So I started to give her some of her first tasks, which is to digitize some of my books. Now she came across this text, Advanced Akan Dictionary, that has so many scientific and medical terms in it. And now she's a native Chi speaker. She said, I didn't know we had any dictionaries. These are resources. And so many of our scholars put in years and years into producing these resources, but many of us have no idea that they even exist. Alafi.
Yechwa.
Alafi. Alafi.
Yechwa.
Wonderful. So, you can look up, are there any dictionaries? So I showed her this one, and then I showed her 10 more Akan dictionaries. Now she thought that there wasn't a single one, but just off of my shelf, I pulled in all these. I said, I need you to digitize all of these ones. Right? So just exposing her to resources. We say inspiration is showing people possibilities. So just by putting them down on the desk, now she saw, look at all these possibilities to learn. So sometimes we go into code mixing because we say our languages are so primitive, we don't have a word for this. We don't have a word for that. Whereas in the 1800s, before we had this neo-colonial complex, we didn't have that idea that, we don't have a word for it. We just knew the word. Or if we didn't have a word, we could coin one just like that, right? I love you. I love you. I love you. Very good. So now we come to why nurses and midwives need this knowledge, to raise awareness of tools that exist currently and how they can be accessed, also to ensure that communication programs that we create work by taking the following considerations and/or constraints into account. You see these images of a nurse from back in the day. This is from back when we were growing up, profs.
Yeah.
That's a running joke. They know we weren't growing up at the same time. And then modern day. So regardless of the topic to be covered, size of population, location, intended audience, or budget, that will find ways to overcome any of those that may otherwise be challenges, right? And we want to empower by dealing with this. So here, theory meets practice in therapeutic communication. I love you. I'm seeing who's paying attention. I'll be like Mr. Nyante, and I'll be taking down names. Yeah. In this section, we will look at practical approaches for how to plan, create, and implement one's own therapeutic communication resources. I love you. Very good. This section will offer general guidelines rather than hard and fast rules. There's plenty of room for individual or group creativity, which takes the realities on the ground into account. Although not every step or suggestion covered in this section may be required or necessary in your situation, you should think about it and see, what's relevant to me and what isn't, right? This isn't by force, right? So theory and practice should be coming together. Now we were looking, is our food ready?
No.
Okay, you're getting it.
Yes.
You can. Okay. I know as soon as the food is ready, I'll just drop the microphone and run out before even you can. Okay. Still waiting. All right, so no problem. I thank you for your patience because I know as we're getting hungry and our bellies are rumbling, the ears stop wanting to listen so well. So that's why we have our technique of Alavi.
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. So these are 4 stages of health communication process. Again, we were looking for something that would fit more here. Now, this one was coming from National Institutes of Health, but I said let's look at adapting it for our own situation. So stage 1, development of plans and strategies. Stage 2, development and piloting of ideas, messages, and materials. Stage 3, implementation of the program. Stage 4, assessment of program effectiveness and consideration of refinements, right? Alafi.
Yes, sir.
So our first stage is we want to define and set communication goals. So you can tell I'm a linguist because I have these corny puns. You see the goal here, right? You'll have to forgive me. All right, so define and set communication goals appropriately and effectively. So you think, what is the overall goal? And we identify it from the outset. So if I'm trying to communicate, what is my goal? Is it about Ebola education? Is it about HIV? You can't use this, or maybe you can, the same poster for HIV and then reuse it the next day for Ebola. I guess it depends on how general it would be, huh? So which aspects of the overall goal could be served by the creation and utilization of these communication resources? So if we want to educate the public on a specific thing, how can we best do that? If these are people who don't have television sets, then we don't want to do a television campaign, it goes without saying. But sometimes we may have development partners and say, we've allocated this budget for television, but you on the ground, you know what's necessary. Everyone has a radio, stuck to their head 24/7. So then we would start to say, based on our realities on the ground, we know this is the most effective method. So here again, we go to what are the specific objectives of the communication campaign and how can these be integrated into the overall goal or the larger plan. So all of these are considerations. These are things that we think about And again, as African people, these are things that we always took into consideration. You know, what is the psychosomatic aspect of it? You know, what is the social aspect of healing or disease, right? These things are not seen as being compartmentalized and dichotomized into tiny boxes where I'm only going to treat your symptom, right? So we think about who is your intended audience. So we identify these stakeholders on the basis of demographic features such as language, age, gender, and so forth and so on. So if we're dealing with feminine health, menstrual, anything like that, then you will start to think about, you know, what colors would I use? What images would I use? What would be the best way to communicate this type of thing? And Prof. Omoniyi even gave examples of breastfeeding. You know, this is a very powerful thing that even if you can't read anything on there, as soon as you see it, you're starting to get an idea, right? So here we would think about any subgroups to which the message should be tailored or could be tailored. Then we also gather information. Now this is very important, right? We'll do a survey of what's my audience like, you know? What languages does my audience speak? So again, we gather information about social environment, physical environment, beliefs, customs, traditions, norms, values, demographic information. This isn't listed, but also religion, spiritual practices, all of these things and more. We can think about how all of these can impact. So if you are targeting a Muslim community and you decide, let's do posters of women in bikinis, will it go far? You understand? Very clearly. So create effective messages and messages that will reach the target population. So you see this, the young boy here with the radio. So the communication goal and the intended audience should be taken into consideration in brainstorming messages and media by which these messages should be conveyed for optimum efficiency. Alafi.
Yes,
Oh, you thought I forgot my call and response. Alafi.
Yes,
Alafi.
Yes,
Very, quiet as kept. I'm using it to keep myself awake as well. So we consider sources such as newspaper, posters, videos to which intended audience may be most likely to respond, right? And there are various media. A lot of people have phones now. So now this can be something that can be deployed directly. When would the intended audience be most likely to respond favorably to the messages? Is there a particular season, right? Is there a particular holiday coming up where people will be gathering together? What's going on? Is it on the weekend where there will be funerals? Do you know that people will be gathering in rural settings to attend them? All of these things would come up. Because if you put up, a message, the people have already gone. What is the utility of that message? Now, your partners, development partners, or whoever who may be financing, they wouldn't know these details, but you can tailor these things to your specific situation. Alafi. Alafi. Very good. And then appropriateness is a key word in all of these considerations. Now, the world's first legal system and system of law was called Ma'at. That was also found in the Nile Valley. And one of the key aspects of it was propriety, doing the appropriate thing at the appropriate time. Alafi. Alafi. So we can use that same system here in contemporary Africa. Pilot programs, and again, this is a pun. You see a pilot here in the aircraft. You have to forgive me, I'm a linguist and I find these things funny. All right, so pilot programs and a small scale pre-testing. So you can use a small sample size, and sometimes the sample size can just be running it by a colleague, right? Oh, I don't speak Dagbani. Let me ask my colleague who does. Do you think that this is something that would go over well with the target audience or intended audience? No, I don't think it would go over well because you've said this, and what it really means is that there's a well-known example in advertising where I think it was Tide, one of these huge detergent companies, what we would call Omo here in Ghana, and they decided to market towards an Arabic audience, in the so-called Middle East, Southwestern Asia, and they decided to get over the language barrier by having an image of, the dirty clothes, and then the washing machine with the Tide in it, and then the clean clothes here to show, here's the cause, here's the effect, here's before and after. Now what they forgot is that in Arabic-speaking places, they read from right to left. So it looked like if I have clean clothes, if you expose it to this detergent, it will make it dirty, right? Now again, this is something that indigenous people would never make that type of mistake, right? there's a proverb in tree, right? This is no matter how big the stranger's eyes are, they can't use them to see anything at all, right? So this is why you are necessary in the development of your own resources. We're not grafting things, from elsewhere that may not fit in our African context. But again, we can look elsewhere for inspiration. Sometimes that elsewhere can be right here in Africa. Sometimes it can be right in our backyard, but also remember to look laterally. Alafi. 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 I like that last one. So feedback is key. So again, we have our pre-tested messages, and then we get feedback on it from a very small sample. And then depending on what the people say, yeah, I think that will really go. So it's not Tikuran Kwejina. One head does not go into council. So you will go into council with several others. Then they'll say, yeah, I think this is a good idea. Then you pilot it, you go out, and yes, it can be successful, right? So once feedback is collected, it should be used to revise materials as appropriate. So even, I came with my own camera. I didn't even know this would be here, but I do this so I can get feedback on my own presentations, because I'll go back and review what went over well, what do I think people understood, how could I revise these slides, feedback in everything that we do, right? So in Kemet as well, there was a concept of seba, and that is the word for to learn. It's also the word for to teach, right? The same word, to learn or to teach, right? You'll find this in various African languages. In Yoruba, ko, depending on how you use it, it can be to learn or to teach. And Wolof, jang, to learn, jangale, to teach, right? In Kikongo, longa, that is to teach, longuka, right? Longa. So these things are always seen as being very closely related. And even in the US, amongst black people, we'll say, let me learn you how to tie your shoe, right? Because we would think in standard English, let me teach you how to tie your shoe. But again, these concepts are seen as being related. So right now you're teaching me how to teach, because when you start nodding over like this, Alafi! I say that to wake you up. You're teaching me how to teach you. Very good. So also consider pre-testing methods that take timelines, budgets, and other resources into account. And then effective implementation. We have our stages that we're going through. We'll follow initial plans, but we should be fluid enough to adapt them when necessary based on feedback and interaction. So there's an Adinkra called Nchinchim, some call it Nchinchimie. So Obrani Kwan Nchinchimie, which is life's path, its twists and turns. So as we come across something that may be difficult, we'll twist in this way. Something else will twist in that way. So we have our initial goals, but then we're fluid enough to adapt them as necessary. So an Adinkra symbol can be a resource for therapeutic communication, right? Alafi. Alafi. We interact and communicate with partners and media for a smooth campaign. But again, we don't wait until the campaign is finished to evaluate the communication campaign. Remember, the feedback loop or revision cycle is ongoing. So we have an effect, action, and effect, the feedback. So as soon as it hits the public, we'll start assessing from right there. How are people taking on to it? Are people singing the song that we've created just for this, right? I remember in Oga, Cape Coast, there was a young man who created a song for Moringa, called it Mama Moringa. And again, this was in order to sensitize people about the healing properties of Moringa. But again, are people taking in onto the song? Is it really catchy? Things of that nature. So again, we consider and then we reconsider. We adapt what needs to be adapted in consideration of achieving the overall goal, right? So we're not so stuck onto, oh, this was our plan, we have to follow it through to the end. Okay, we can see that our overall goal is paramount. So if this way isn't getting you there, perhaps this way can get you there. Particularly when budgetary concerns are an issue, it may be useful to combine resources with that of partners for cooperative economics, right? In Kiswahili, they call it Ujamaa, right? So that's cooperative economics. So we can even look at other African languages. What are the concepts there, right? Susu, all these types of things for pulling resources together. We can reduce the campaign activities. We can seek assistance from volunteers. And then we can also research real-life models and implement best practices of like organizations, so this is covered up, that reduce costs for mounting similar programs. So we learn, we adjust, we do, we learn, we adjust, we do. Alafi.
Yeshua.
Alafi.
Yeshua.
Alafi. That is therapeutic. Right? Challenges to overcome. This is a piggy bank, and you see that there's tightening of the waistline here. So although funds are never limitless, even within the context of budgetary constraints, one can still set objectives and plan. So it doesn't cost any money to sit here and think, right? If I'm sitting here and you see me doing like this, there's no one who can take money from me for doing that, right? And sometimes this is the most important part of the entire process, right? You can learn about one's intended audience. You know, if I'm here in the room, just as Mr. Nyante did, he asked, you know, what groups are here represented? You know, just as my colleague did, what languages are represented here, right? All of this, no one was able to collect any money from him from asking those questions. Even as we were on the way from the airport, our taxi driver was giving us an entire history lesson, right? And I was just sitting there amazed, like, wow, this guy is deep. I would give him a job at Legon, right? Pre-test by a small sample or pilot program. So if you have 2 or 3 of you who are here from the same organization, then just amongst yourselves, you can say, you know what? Let's try some of these things out. Let's try to work out a plan of how these things can work. You understand? And then we're making things for our specific situation, whether it's Navrongo, Tamale, wherever we happen to be. So taking these steps can enhance a program's effectiveness and ensure better outcomes. Alafi. 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 So here we see, based on local circumstances, a wide variety of methods can be used to engage the intended audience. Now, I don't know how well you can see this. Let me see if I can zoom in a bit. Can people see this image? This is a healer of some sort who is using this in order to sell something to you. Now, someone who may not be able to read or write or anything else would just see, okay, these are problems. This is a problem. This is a problem. Now, of course, we may do something a little bit more sophisticated than that, but this person understands something about his intended audience. And apparently is at least successful enough that, you know, people are understanding, coming, and it is working for this person. Right? So for us, we're advertising radio, television, billboards, posters, digital, education, entertainment, films, documentaries, plays, games, individual and group instruction. So I have some colleagues who work at NGOs. Alafi.
Yeshua.
Alafi.
Yeshua.
Alafi. I can hold it longer than you. Not that it's a competition. All right? So I've had colleagues who will sometimes do plays. They'll get young people in the community and then they'll stage a play about whatever the topic is. Sometimes about water, sanitation, health, any of these things, you know, the WASH sector as they call it. And sometimes these are the most important things because the youth are able to participate. So it's not, I'm sitting here giving you a lecture and I have to say, Alafi, to keep you awake. Everyone is getting up there playing a role, right? So they really understand it on a deeper level. They'll come up with their own script. Any of these things can be effective. Media advocacy, public service announcements, partnership development, working with organizations whose goals align with our overall objectives. So looking at existing models that can serve as resources and templates upon which new resources can be developed, right? So we focus on a few methods initially. So we may say, all right, let's zoom into education entertainment. So we're embedding health promoting messages and storylines into entertainment. So perhaps it's a Kumawood film. And we have some sway. My uncle is the one who is running the production. So we try to get something into there, right? Perhaps it's Nollywood. All right, I have enough Naira. Let me try to get my messages into this film, right? It will take place, be set in a hospital. Partnership development, so we can increase support for a program or issue by harnessing the influence, credibility, resources, and profit, all these things. So sometimes we can just have a volunteer, and through what they can do, sometimes what they can do would be more than you could even pay someone to do. Allah. 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 Now you want to hold it longer. I see. They're so competitive.
Yes.
Also, we can look online. You know, modern day things, we can look at the internet. I did a cursory search. I found Our Health Africa as a website, pretty comprehensive. It had a lot of information on there. Glossby, this is a website that has multilingual dictionaries for many languages. And especially when I want scientific and technical terms in Wolof, this is my go-to resource. So you go to glossby.com, and if you want to know the word for electron, right? If you want to know the word for proton, for the names of planets, you go here and you can find, you'll be surprised at what you can find, right? Names of medicine and things of that nature. Mobile phone apps. So I went on to the Play Store and I found HIV Clinical Guide, and then I found this, the Digital African Health Library. So someone has been thinking about these things before I started thinking about them, and they've already gone through an entire program. So sometimes it's not necessary to recreate the wheel, which was also invented in Africa. We'll come back to that if you're interested. So digital media, social media, SMS messages, you can look at any of these types of services in order to communicate and interact with others, right? So, you know, sometimes you can say, oh, let me get your number. I need to send you some information, right? We shouldn't be so high and mighty that, oh, I can't interact with you unless I am wearing my suit and tie and I have my lab coat on, and yes, yeah, right? We're trying to solve overall goals, and the overall goal isn't to make ourselves feel better. We talked about a proverb in Yoruba, Aki Igbon ju eni ti an difa fun. Let's say that together. Aki Igbon.
Aki Igbon.
Aki Igbon.
Aki Igbon.
Ju eni
Ju eni
ti an
Ti an
difa fun.
difa fun.
This is to say we are not wiser than the person we are divining for. So in the society, it's often seen that the Babalawo is the most esteemed, they're the wisest people. But what they say is we're not wiser than the person who we're doing the divination for. That means when you come to me, I ask, what's your home situation? What's your family situation? Has there been any violence? Are you feeling guilty about any of these things? So from getting all of those things, now I have a context to understand how to approach it. I could just give you this medicine, take it, go. I may have treated the symptoms, but you come back a month later with the same problems because I didn't go to the source. Now, oftentimes, that's what pharmaceutical companies want to do. Keep you on the same drug for your whole life. That's very good for their bottom line, their stakeholders and investors, right? So they create the disease, then they rent you a cure for the symptoms, right? That's very good for their thing. But if you are an African in your own society, you really want to deal with these types of things, you want to deal with the source, right? Because your goals are oftentimes more altruistic. You want your own child to be healthy. So in summary, we've given a broad overview and considerations in the processes for creating therapeutic communication resources. You'll have access to these slides so you can go back over them, because these are stages. And again, these aren't laws or rules written in stone. We showed you some other things that were written in stone, but these are very adaptable. So you can say, I love you. I love you. I love you. I saw someone yawn. I said, I'm droning on way too much. He's teaching me how to teach. Right? Also, additionally, we pointed out several existing resources for therapeutic communication that can serve as models, right? And you can see the happy result down here, right? Yes, I was happy with my therapeutic communication here. Now, my son, if I wanted to take this picture, he would be crying just out of spite. But I love him all the same. So also, we'll go to exercises that Mr. Nee will go through with us. But these are things that we can also be thinking about as we go off and have our lunch. So we can go through the steps for planning a therapeutic communication campaign appropriate for your locale with others in the same area. So especially those of you who came together, right? You can say, what do you think would work in our situation? Do we want to use English when our main intended audience don't understand English, right? Should we force them and say, the Constitution said English, so therefore we'll ram English down your throat? That may be the solution, it may not. But these are things that you yourself would think about, right? We want to say, should we use images? Now, sometimes I see some of these communication campaigns, and on the billboard, it looks nothing like the people who are there on the ground. You'll see a man and woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, and they're doing something. What does that do psychologically to the person who's there on the ground? They'll just say, I'm not a monk, right? So all of these things should be considerations of how to tailor things. Now, you may have gotten that billboard directly from your sponsors in Deutschland somewhere, but you would start to think, you know what, let me see how I can make it something that the person can relate to. There's a well-known quote from Nelson Mandela, that if you speak to a person in a language he understands, it goes to his head. But if you speak to a person in his own language, it goes to his heart. I love you.
Yes,
I love you.
Yes,
Stop it! We've been having way too much fun for a workshop. Stop that. But again, just like my Kikongo teacher said, all of these things can be healing, right? So, which steps are relevant for you and which are not? You can say, you know what? I think that stage about, let's sit down and do a pilot program, we already know the lay of the land. I've lived here for 30 years, so let's go forward with it. That's fine. But also remember, as you get feedback, if it ends up not being fine, then you start to rethink it, right? What intended audience would be your focus for your particular area? Who really needs it? Is it the men? Is it the women? They say, so the blacksmith hits the place where it's necessary, right? So you don't want to be hitting the place that's already flat, then you end up bending it out of shape. Now this one that needs the bending, you leave it alone. So, who in your community really needs this type of thing? Is it the youth? Is it pregnant women? What is it? What resources would be most effective in consideration of your intended audience? Once you've narrowed things down, now you say to reach the children, it has to be on the phone. Otherwise, they will never look at it, they will never listen to it, right? All of these things. And then also, how could you go about creating these resources? Now, you saw the image of the billboard selling medicine. This guy just got a plank of wood and some paint. He said, hey, I'm going very low cost, but effective. And I think you saw the effective man being shown there. So all of these things are considerations for Alafi. 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 You thought I was going to keep it going. Hey, I had to switch it up on you. And then further reading, I mentioned some of these. This is the one I really want you to focus in on. If you can read this text, Self-Healing Power and Therapy. Now this is an African from the Congo. But again, if we can go all the way to the US and UK to learn about therapeutic communication, we can go just a few miles down to Congo and learn what an indigenous perspective on therapeutic communication is. And again, I recommend it wholeheartedly, unreservedly, as one of the best books I've ever read in any subject gone on. Self-Healing Power and Therapy. All right, and then also this is one that actually came out of the Institute of African Studies, and this is, some of you have heard of Kweku Bonsam, right? Back in the 50s and 60s, there was an Okomfo who sat down with Prof. Kofi Asare Opoku, and he was detailing how he was able to treat all of these things. Now, he was in the newspapers, everyone heard about him. You may remember him from when we were growing up. It was Nana Kweku Mframa. Yeah? So, he was well known. So, Prof. Opoku wanted to get at how were you able to heal this story that I heard about in this. And he said, this is what I did. I realized that this child had leprosy because the mother had cursed this one, and then this one felt bad. So I decided I had to get them to make up, and then once they made up, the leprosy went away. Because there were other factors, psychosomatic factors that were playing a part. So again, he asked, he didn't say, oh, I'm the all-knowing person, let me just force this drug down your throat. He asked what was going on, and then he took it from the source, right? Who saw a wounded timwa? That if you grab a snake by its head, everything else is just a rope or a vine. You don't have to worry about it. So, these are some of the resources. And again, you can look forward towards the US, UK, wherever you like. You can look back towards your village. But if any message can get through, also look laterally, right? also look towards classical African civilizations that we are intentionally not told about, because oftentimes the solutions that they're coming up with in the US and UK are based on their readings of our own ancient texts that we've never learned about. Alafi. 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 Thank you so much for your time. Any questions, thoughts, concerns? I was about to run down and get my lunch. I realize we may have questions. Are we okay? Everyone's belly is rumbling. Heads are starting to ache. Okay.
Alafi.
Alafi.
You can go for a food.
So we'll postpone Q&A until we get back. You can be thinking about some of these things that we talked about. I won't torture you by making you wait.
Let's give it to Blanc. Thank you so much.